Today's video is part 2 about changing notes with lifting grace notes. Stay tuned. Well, hello everybody, I'm Willis Bagpiper, and on this channel I make videos to make you a stronger and more confident piper. If you like this kind of content, please think about liking the video, subscribing to the channel, commenting below with any thoughts you might have, and sharing with any other pipers in your life. I also give Skype lessons if you want more personalized instruction, but more on that later. In the last installment in the Basics series here, I was dealing with changing notes with lifting grace notes on relatively simple note changes, notes that involve just the lifting or lowering of fingers to make the note change. But that's only some of the notes on our chanter. Other notes, you have to use a cross, like when you're going from A to C. You notice we have to both lift these and lower our pinky. And if we have to do that with a lifting grace note, well, that's a lot of different motions that we have to put together. So I want a relatively straightforward way of changing notes with grace notes. And today it's going to be a little bit more complicated, but I promise you we'll work step by step and get you there. In the description below, there's a link to the PDF document we're using here. And importantly, you would really need a color printer or maybe even keep it on a tablet because we're going to be using color. Now, if you don't have access to either a tablet or a color printer, you can print it out on a black and white printer and just use highlighters and carefully make sure that you're marking the same notes on your document that I have on mine. But if possible, have it on a tablet or have a color printer so that you can follow along with the colors I'm using here. If you haven't watched the previous video, I very much recommend you watch part 1 of the Changing Notes with Lifting Grace Notes series here to get all of the kind of nuances I'm going to be talking about. I don't want you to maybe miss something I'm talking about today. And if you're needing help changing grace notes, these are the more complicated ones. You might want to go back and try those as well anyway. As with the previous document and video, all of the lifting motions on this document that we're going to use have the fingering in yellow and with an open hole. That's going to be the indicator that you're lifting your finger to make the note change. The blue closed hold are showing you which fingers are going to have to come down to finish that motion. And you'll see when we get to the very last line, it gets pretty complicated when we get to D, G, grace note to F, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. One thing at a time. As I did last time, we're actually going to be playing this in half time to begin with, which means that the quarter notes are going to be getting 2 beats and the half notes 4. And also, the grace note changes right now, the lifting motion of the fingers, they're going to be getting 2 beats as well when we first start. So the first step is to be able to do the note changes with a 2-beat lifting grace note to really show you and start programming in the proper finger motions. Then, for step 2, we're going to take that grace note change and make it just 1 beat. And then finally, probably without a metronome at first, we're going to try to make these grace note changes between notes with crosses cleanly, quickly, with a nice cha-sounding grace note. Now, I will say right now, if you find that that's a step too far, no worries at all. Keep it at 2 beats for the theme note, 1 beat for the lifting grace note change, and then 2 beats or 4 beats for the note you're landing on. No problem at all. Right now, it's more important that it's good, clean, and accurate rather than fast. Let's dive right in. We're going to start with a lifted G grace note on C this time. So as soon as we start, we're going to have the G grace note in the air. We're going to close that down for the C. Then we're going to lift both the pointer finger and the pinky on bottom. And as you can see in the document, we have both of those fingers shown in the lifted yellow position. And then to go back to an A, you can see the 3 fingers, the top pointer on the middle and ring on bottom coming down for the A. Then we're going to lift the same 3 fingers to go up to a C with the G grace note. And then finally close the top pointer and bottom pinky so that we can get a good clean C when we're done. Let's try this with 2 beats each per note. Today, the metronome we're using is the Soundbrenner wearable metronome. This thing is fantastic. I have a review for it in one of these cards. So you'll be able to hear it through the phone, but I'll also be able to feel it right through my wrist. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on before we get started. I have the metronome set at 82. You set it where you need to have it for you in your world. So that's going to be step 1, 2 beats per change. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make the grace note changes just 1 beat each. And then finally, we're going to do this with the grace notes being good, clean, clear. And with the metronome, Now we're moving on, A, G grace note to D. Now with just one beat per lifting grace note. Now I'm going to do the entire first page here where I again am putting it in halftime, where I'm giving the quarter notes 2, the half notes 4 beats, and the lifting grace notes 2 beats, so you can see the good clean lifting motions. When I need to take a breath on this, however, I'm going to come back to the note I was on so that we're really seeing every note change that is on this page. So if I need to take a breath at the end of line 2 where I'm on an A, I'm going to come back in on that A before I go to line 3 with that E grace note to D. I want to make sure that we're seeing all of the various changes possible on this page. So I'm taking a breath, going into line 2. I'm going to start again on the low A so I can make all of the note changes through line 2. Again, going into line 3, starting on the end of line 2. With that last example, from E to B, back up to E, finally moving into some top hand notes. Now, let's go on to page 2. Now I'm going to do the first 3 lines, and then we're going to talk about the bottom line here. Line 4 of page 2 is its own special, unique animal. We're coming from an E, so I'm starting on the E from the last page, coming down with the G grace note, back down to B. There we go. And I'm not going to lie, this is challenging even for me to break it down that slowly. Some of these changes have become automatic, but automatic's not necessarily a good thing. You want to be able to control your playing. There's an old saying, I've said it in other videos, I'll say it again here. If you can't play it slow, you can't play it at all. So let's talk about this bottom line, huh? So the first one we're dealing with is E G grace note to D, and then back up with a G grace note to E. And the thing that makes this tricky, if you look, there's a point in time and space where these are the only fingers you have on. That's right, the top middle finger and the top thumb. Everything else comes off. If we're starting on an E with a G grace note down to a D, we're going to have to figure out all the fingers we need. So from an E to go down to a D, we have to lift these three, and with a G grace note, boom, leaving us with just, again, those two fingers covered. Then from here, we have to lower everything, which is going to be the other top two fingers and the pinky simultaneously. So that's a lot of fingers to move at one time. So get used to this fingering position right here. Thumb, middle finger, and nothing else, because we're going to be changing between D and E and D a lot. And whether we're going up to the D or down to the D, you're going to find your fingers in that open position. So this is one worth practicing quite a few times. We're going to try this one by itself with the metronome. And if using a metronome is too tricky when you first start, no worries at all. Just play it slowly, cleanly, evenly. Get all the fingering correct in there. We don't want to hear any sort of runs when you're going from the D and lifting, like, which means the ring finger's coming up. We want to make sure that the fingers are all moving together up and down together. We want to make sure we're lifting before we lower, everything up together, everything down together. Remember how I just talked about lifting everything and then lowering everything? Well, that's been true for every note change save one. I have a video coming up where I'm going to discuss the D to high G and how it's a little bit tricky. And in the case of this G grace note between D and F, the same rules are going to apply. I'm going to talk about them right now. So if you notice on the sheet, on the last two changes, there are 3 places we're going, not just 2. Because the pinky's going to have to be involved on the bottom a little bit more than it was on the other note changes. Because if we're coming from a D and we actually lift everything we need to go to an F, well, as you can see right here, that's not going to work for us very well. We only have 2 thumbs holding the chanter, and I don't know about you, if I wasn't holding this thing like a fiddle under my chin, I'd be dropping it. And even on a set of pipes, a lot of times the chanter wants to kind of push a little bit out away from you. So if you were to actually let go that much, the chanter might actually come out of your hands. So regardless if you're on the practice chanter or the pipes, we're going to have to do something. And pipers have been playing this note change forever, and I think everyone just figures it out and what works for them. But I've figured out a way to make it slow and methodical so that we make sure we get it right and clean. We're going to start right on the D this time, but we're going to lift just the top 3 and not the pinky. Now, I'm not going to say this is the most comfortable position, but even without my mouth on the chanter, I can hold it with the pinky on there. That helps keep it from falling out of my hands. So we're starting on D, and we're in nearly the lifted position for F. Now, from here, we're going to go ahead and lower to an F, which is the top pointer, bottom, pointer, middle, and ring, and then we're going to lift our pinky. So there is a moment of slight overlap, but I promise you that's not very audible, and the more you do it, the quicker you're going to be able to make this change and not have to snatch or grab the chanter quickly. So it's a nice fluid motion, and yet it never had to like grab it quickly. But if you have to start with a little bit more of an overlap, that's totally cool. Yeah, there's a noise, but it's small and it'll get smaller as you practice it. And then, before we stick this to a metronome, even stranger is when you're coming from an F back down to a D. With this one, this is the one exception to my lift before you lower rule. Even what we just did, we kind of just lifted later, but we didn't actually start with a lowering. This time, we're starting with a lowering motion. We're going to be on F, and the first thing we're going to do is actually lower our pinky before we lift the other one, so that we can be in that position, that was the same middle position we had before, to successfully get back down to that D. If we don't lower the pinky first from F, it's really hard to keep that chanter in your hands. And this is all shown on here. You can see the unusual motions have both arrows underneath them as well as a little bit of asterisks next to them, trying to make it clear what the special motion is that's making these different than the rest. We're going to stick the metronome back on now, 2 beats per quarter note, 4 beats per half note, and 2 beats per lifting grace note right now. That one's tricky. Take your time, get it clean. Going up from D, G Grace note to F is going to be especially important because it happens 7 times in the version of Amazing Grace I'll be getting to shortly. So I'm going to go through now and again play the whole exercise, starting with page 1. Obviously I'm going to have to scroll to page 2, so there'll be a wee break there. But I'm going to be giving the quarter notes 2 beats, the half notes 4 beats, but this time the grace note changes are only going to get 1 beat instead of 2. So we're starting to make them a little bit smaller, a little crispier, a little bit more about what they're going to sound like in the real music. Scrolling to page 2, coming in from an E. That was the last note of the first page. So when you've completed parts 1 and 2, you will have made every grace note change possible on the Chanter with the grace notes G, D, and E. That's something to be proud of. We're actually going to go through several tunes before we go to the high A grace note, which we're going to use whenever we're coming to and from a high G. We'll worry about that later. Again, hopefully there'll be a card linked up here when it's ready. But this is more than enough to get onto some great, solid bagpipe tunes. I'm going to play through it one more time. This time it's going to be at full speed, meaning the quarter notes are going to get 1 beat, half notes 2 beats, and the grace notes are going to be quick and chirpy, but not overly tight. I'm not creating them because I'm crushing them with my hand. I'm just not lifting the finger very much. On to page 2, knowing that we're starting on an E. I'll say it again, there is no hurry to get through it quickly. Only do that when you can complete it at the other speeds clearly. Cleanliness is what we're needing here. We don't need more messy bagpipes out there. There's enough of those. You're not watching this series because you want to be a poor piper. You're watching it because you want to be a competent piper commanding your bagpipe. So now we're moving on to the High Road to Garlock. This is a classic tune. It's a classic setting of this tune. But for today, I have taken out some of the more complicated embellishments. So for those of you that know what a doubling is, there are no doublings here. For those of you who know what throws are, there are no throws here. But the grace notes that are present are the same grace notes that are going to be there when we learn the full version. So if you commit this one to memory, no worries, we're just going to add a few extra sparkles on it when we get to some of the other embellishments. But you do well to play this the way it's written here as we're kind of going through the process. So there you go, everybody. Between parts 1 and 2, you will have made every grace note change possible from low G to F using G grace notes, D grace notes, and E grace notes. Again, high G and high A are not included because you can't play a G grace note, a D grace note, or an E grace note to either of those notes. But again, that being said, there is much we can do and many tunes we're going to be getting to in short order. Thank you for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed this video, think about giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, sharing with any other pipers in your life, and commenting below with any thoughts you might have. If you wanted to go the extra mile, you could go head over to my Patreon, where as little as $1 a month goes a long way to helping support the channel. There's often early releases of some of my videos and other small bits of content, and it helps more than you know. So if you want to help support the channel, go head over there. If you want more personalized instruction, I do give Skype lessons. Go ahead and head over to www.mattpiper.com or email me at matt@mattpiper, and we'll get you going. I'm working with students from all over the planet, and it's fantastic, and I hope to work with you soon. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I'm Matt Willis Bagpiper. Until next time, cheers.